Towards sustainable and smart mobility, this episode of the Move Africa show on Future Cities Africa is with Chris Kost, Africa Program Director at the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. Chris, welcome. It's fantastic to have you on the show. Can you give us a brief overview of your role at the ITDP?
Yeah, thanks for having me for the discussion. So I work as a transport planner with the Institute for Transportation Development Policy. And so ITDP is a nonprofit organization that works with cities around the world to make urban mobility systems more equitable and environmentally sustainable. And so I work with the Africa team at ITDP, and we have a presence in 6 countries around the region, primarily in East Africa. And we're very happy to be supporting cities in their transformation to have better mobility.
So what exactly is the ITDP? What is its strategic objectives? And do you have some projects that you would want to highlight?
ITDP exists to make cities more people friendly. For too many years, we've been designing our cities for cars, and it's been to the detriment of quality of life. And so we work with cities to improve public transport, to build complete streets that have adequate facilities for walking and cycling, to improve road safety, so that it's safe to cross the street. And we also work on the intersection of land use and transport planning, so ensuring that we have compact mixed-use development in our cities that brings people closer to their destinations and minimizes the environmental impacts of travel.
Chris, there are many challenges, but what are some of the key challenges that is faced by the industry, and what are some of the solutions to these barriers?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that we're still investing way too much money in car-centric infrastructure. So cities are building flyovers, urban highways. We're converting what used to be walkable streets into these limited access, high-speed corridors that are just designed for car movement at high speeds. And so that's led to a big challenge in terms of road safety. If you take Kenya as one example, last year we had more than 4,500 fatalities from traffic crashes. And out of those, more than 1,500 of them were pedestrians. And so we're having a crisis on our streets, where people are not able to move around safely. And it's because of this legacy of car-oriented highway design. And so we really need to have a more people-centric approach where we acknowledge that the majority of residents in African cities don't use cars. They travel by foot, they use public transport, they're cycling. And so the investments that we make in our transport system need to reflect that reality.
Do you have any examples of African cities that are currently actually getting it right?
Definitely. Dar es Salaam is a great case. Dar has been able to implement the first phase of its BRT system. So it stretches 21 kilometers, it carries 200,000 people a day, and it's cut their travel times in half compared to what they faced before, when they were on buses that were stuck in mixed traffic. So it's really been able to transform the quality of life for people in the corridor. And not only did it improve conditions for the public transport users, but that corridor also includes world-class walking and cycling facilities, so people are able to cycle to work safely if they're not using the bus. So it's really been able to transform the mobility system in Dar. And the city is now expanding that to a second phase. And then the third phase is about to start construction. They have financing lined up for the fourth and fifth phases. So the city's really on a roll toward having a mass rapid transit system that's going to function citywide and really provide better service to people who need to move. Another city I might mention is Kisumu in Kenya. So it's a city of about 500,000 people in Western Kenya. And Kisumu has been making strides in improving the walking environment. So ITDP had worked with the city government to upgrade walkways in the city center. It's known as the Kisumu Triangle Project. And now the city is expanding that with a second phase that also includes some dedicated cycle tracks. And these streets have been designed with universal access in mind, with safe crossings. So there are ramps for vehicles that reduce the vehicle speeds, and also maintaining the existing tree cover rather than cutting down all the trees, which is often what happens in road improvement projects in the region. So, some of these cities are really showing the way that it's possible to respond to the real needs of the population and not just pretend that we can build our way out of the problem by having wider roads and flyovers.
Chris, you've mentioned this car-centric approach to urban development and planning, but it doesn't make sense. So, how do we change this and why is it actually still happening?
Well, I was just going to make one point about that, why this trend is so persistent. And it's because a lot of the finance for urban mobility is still going into these car centric projects. So that's one of the changes that we really need to make, where we need development banks and bilateral lenders to start investing in clean, efficient urban mobility. So that means improving public transport systems, expanding bus fleets, building bike share systems, developing good walking and cycling facilities. We really need to see that change in the spending, so that we're not continuing to pour money into these solutions that just make the problem worse.
Are there any emerging technologies and innovative projects that you are very excited about?
I'm really excited about the potential for e-bikes. So there's been a lot of talk in our region about electrifying the boda, the motorcycle fleets. But recently, we've seen that trend also happening with bicycles. And in Nairobi, where I stay, there's been an explosion in the number of e-bikes that are used for courier services. So a lot of food delivery is happening now by e-bikes, and I think there's tremendous potential for this to transform our cities, because when you add the electric motor to the bicycle, it transforms it into a mode that's really competitive with any kind of motorized travel. Whether it's a taxi or a car. Sometimes you'd even use an e-bike to substitute a bus trip. So e-bikes have a lot of potential, and I think we need to see how we can unlock investment. So a lot of the incentives that are currently extended to cars and like electric cars and electric motorcycles can also be expanded to benefit e-bikes, and that'll provide a very affordable but fast mobility alternative for people in the Africa region. One other exciting development in the region is the growing number of bike share systems that are in different stages of planning and implementation. And we're going to see the launch of the first phase bike share in Cairo. So it'll be the first bike share that's been implemented at scale in the Africa region. And in the initial phase, it'll have 500 cycles distributed around 45 stations. And we're really hopeful to see bike share expand to the region, because this has been a real gap, where there's tremendous potential, but so far most bike shares have been concentrated in other parts of the world. We want to see these bike shares come to the Africa region. And besides Cairo, various other cities are in the planning process. So Nairobi is working on plans for bike share. Addis Ababa is also going to launch a system soon. So we're looking forward to seeing these systems get off the ground.
So, on behavioral change, how does actual behavioral change happen? How do we make it work?
Yeah, to address behavior change, I think it still comes back to the kinds of services and infrastructure that we provide. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a dignified place to walk or cycle, if the public transport system isn't functioning well, it's very hard to convince someone to make that shift. So I think we need to make the first step as transport planners, as governments, when we're making investments in urban mobility, to actually create proper facilities so people have a viable alternative to using a private car. And when that's in place, it becomes much easier to use monetary incentives, for instance, to raise parking fees, to make it harder to get private vehicles. Then we're able to use those incentives to get people onto sustainable modes. But we need to have high quality facilities in the first place, because the reality is, in African cities, even today, most people are traveling by active mobility, active modes, or public transport. But the issue is that the quality of the facilities that people get is very poor. And so as soon as people have money, they want to shift. So if we want to change that expectation, we need to develop systems that are better.
Chris, do you see competition between different alternative modes of transport actually being a barrier to the uptake of these different modes of transport?
I think it's critical to have an integrated public transport system. So we don't want to pit one mode against another. And we need to create the operating conditions where public transport operators can work together for this common goal of providing a high quality service for the passenger. And so one of the things that we've worked on with a lot of cities is seeing how we can transform the business model in bus-based public transport. So moving away from the target system where drivers' incomes are based on the number of passengers they carry that day, to having better structures, corporatized public transport operators where drivers are on salary. And that changes that whole incentive structure. So you're no longer facing that on-road competition because you have a clear operating agreement, hopefully under the auspices of government, that indicates where you can operate and the frequencies you need to operate in other conditions like that. And then you focus on providing a good service. And you're not worried about overtaking the next bus so that you can pick up that load of passengers, because that competition is really what leads to a lot of the challenges we have. So there are a number of cities that are, have taken steps in this direction. So Kigali has done a lot of work to consolidate their, small informal operators to form a larger cooperative that's now operating the bus service under contract with the city, along with 2 other operators. And Dar es Salaam is taking similar steps with their BRT system, where until now it's been operating under a similar business model where the operator was responsible for all aspects of the system and had to cover all the costs through whatever fare revenue they could earn, toward more of a gross cost model where the operators will be paid by kilometer and there will be service quality incentives and there will be more transparency in the way that revenue is collected. And there will be multiple operators in the BRT network. And so you'll be able to have several operators running on the same corridor without having to worry about that daily competition on the route. So the idea is to compete to win the contract, but then when you're on the road, you're no longer facing that competition. You have a different revenue model to support the operators.
Chris, in closing, what is your vision for the future of cities? What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, my vision for the future of cities is that we want to have cities that are equitable, where everyone has equal access to jobs, to other opportunities. Also, cities that are safe, where kids are free to walk to school. It's safe to cycle. I'm a cyclist myself, so I want to see a day when all of our cities have safe cycle networks. And basically, cities where the public transport system and public spaces and our streets in general really become that kind of meeting ground where people from all walks of life come together and cross paths. And I think that's really critical for overcoming a lot of the social schisms that we're seeing in societies these days. We really need to have this shared public realm where we can experience the city together and interact with one another. And that's the kind of city I'd like to see in the future.
A big thank you to Christopher Kost for this insightful conversation on the Move Africa show on Future Cities Africa.